Digital dermatitis is a bacterial infectious hoof lesion. We have many causes of lameness. It's one of the main causes of lameness. Need to be an infection component. It has an infection component. It's driven by bacteria, gram-negative bacteria mostly, and anaerobic microphilic bacteria. Usually treponemes are the type of bacteria that is mostly associated with it, but it has large cocktail of different families of bacteria that play a role in establishing the disease and getting different stages and severities.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm your host for today, Gil Carpenter, State Dairy Extension Specialist with Iowa State University. I'm joined today by Dr. Laura Solano and Laura. It comes to us originally from Costa Rica. So you studied down in Costa Rica, did your vet school down there, then spent a lot of time up in Calgary, up in Canada. Spent some time as a private consultant in the animal care space. Spent some time working with Lactanet in dairy comfort and animal welfare, and now are at very freshly at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the vet school, where she is an assistant professor. So that was kind of a long trek.
Yeah.
Not the most direct way to get to Wisconsin.
Nor the most common. Yeah.
Yes. So what's your role at UW-Madison? And how were you prepped by your education and experience to get there?
Yeah, so I started recently, 6 months ago. So it's been quite a long journey throughout many different places and different career paths. Now in my new position here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I'm in the vet school, so I have a teaching component for vet students. We're teaching third year, fourth year vet students first year, training those new generations of vets, and also the research component. And my research history and expertise has been, since Calgary, has been on the cow comfort, hoof health, animal well-being side of things. And I'm continuing on that research path, but also I'm expanding that and examining, as part of my research and outreach component here at the university, expanding that and examining the intersection among dairy cattle health and performance, but also the aspects of that with farm management, work dynamics, workplace dynamics, structure, workflow, and the role of farm managers, employees, and veterinarians. So yeah, it's a long path ahead, an exciting long path ahead. And believe it or not, this is an improvement in weather. So that was a
Really?
big, From Costa Rica, I went to Canada. That was a terrible long winters. Beautiful, beautiful place. It will always be in my heart. But oh my God, the winter. Yeah.
You're working your way back south a little bit.
So
yeah.
Wisconsin is actually milder. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Still, I'll escape to Costa Rica during winter time, but yeah.
Well, we don't have volcanoes in the Midwest, so.
No, that is right. And no earthquakes.
That's true. Well,
not as many.
Yes.
Mycotoxins are silent poisons, challenging the health and productivity of your cows. Protect your cows and your business by testing feedstuffs to know which mycotoxins are present in your environment. With that information in hand, you can work with your nutritionist to develop a management program to reduce mycotoxin impacts on your cows and your operation. To get started with your own mycotoxin control program, talk to your Diamond V representative today.
So let's get in and start talking a little bit about lameness, and specifically today we want to talk about digital dermatitis. Digital dermatitis actually affects up to 90, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but affects up to 95% of large dairy operations and around 70% of all U.S. dairies, which is, so I'm sure, huge economic impact there. But can you just start by talking to us a little bit about what exactly digital dermatitis is and what is its impact on dairy cattle?
Yeah. So, well, Digital dermatitis is a bacterial infectious hoof lesion. We have many causes of lameness. It's one of the main causes of lameness. Need to be an infection component. It has an infection component. It's driven by bacteria, gram-negative bacteria mostly, and anaerobic microphilic bacteria. Usually treponemes are the type of bacteria that is mostly associated with it, but it has large cocktail of different families of bacteria that play a role in establishing the disease and getting different stages and severities. So usually the way that it presents, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, is an ulcer-like, erosion-like lesion in the heel bulbs, in the heel bulb of the hoof, and in the interdigital space can also happen, but what is common is that it affects the skin of the hoof. And it has different stages. The life cycle of the disease is quite dynamic. It jumps from different stages. We traditionally or typically categorize those M0, M1, M2, 3, 4, 4.1. And that just is relevant because it just tells us how dynamic the disease is, and it can jump from one stage to the other within days. And it's painful. Most of the active lesions, those ones that are M2s and M4.1s, those are kind of like the typical ulcer-like, erosion-like disease, really, lesion that it's painful at touch and that it's the infectious part. When cows are infected with that type of stage, some of them do show lameness. It's painful, and it also depends on where it occurs, because you can imagine that if sometimes it doesn't, it's not as big or bad enough to produce lameness, but a lot of times it is, and it also happens in the interdigital space where it can be very painful as well. So the lameness associated with it varies depending on the severity of the lesion. And usually we would see changes in the way the cows walk. They may tend to just kind of walk a little bit more on the heels and just alter the gait. So those are some of the clinical signs that we get to see. Other part of the question was regarding the
impact. Yeah.
So the impact, it relates with an impact on the productivity, milk production. It decreases milk production. Some other lesions may have an impact of decreasing maybe 5 pounds a day or something over those numbers. Digital dermatitis is usually about 0.8 or 1.5 pounds per day, depending on the severity. The big issue with it is that it's very prevalent. So it affects a lot of animals at the same time. We see it at rates of maybe 20-25% of animals affected at the same time, if not even higher than that. So just multiplying that milk loss by the number of animals affected at one point in time is what makes it very, very costly. It also has an impact on calving days, open days. When heifers are infected, for example, at early stages, it has an impact after they calve on the open days, about 21, 25 days more open than if they wouldn't be infected. Also, it has an impact on recurring the disease. So whenever they get infected before calving, they tend to relapse and be more likely to have DD afterwards during their second lactation and on. So it does have an impact on how susceptible the animal becomes to have DD afterwards as well. And let me see. And also it has a lot of impact, obviously, on all of the treatment costs, the associated costs with that, and the treatments that come into place. But probably the major issue that it is with it is how it becomes a chronic endemic issue at the farm. The way that the bacteria kind of gets in the skin and kind of invades and starts creating these different presentations of lesions, they need some sort of insult to the skin barrier. They need kind of like a maceration or some sort of opening in the skin barrier. And once this bacteria sees like an opportunity to get in, and that's when we talk about hygiene as well, because the hygiene plays a huge factor and a huge role in weakening the skin, and making it more prone to kind of have those micro lacerations that allow the bacteria to invade. So once the bacteria invades, starts kind of like migrating down the layers of the skin, deeper down the layers of the skin. It actually uses, they think, the hair follicles to kind of like migrate down the skin. And the deeper it gets in the skin layers, then the presentation kind of changes, and it goes from M1 lesions or less complicated lesions to more proliferative and hyperkeratotic lesions, because it's just an inflammation of the skin. So those reactions make that the skin layers really change, and it becomes a chronic issue. And that's probably the biggest impact that it has, that once it's a chronic lesion, the tryponims kind of change their forms and they insist in deeper layers of the skin, and it's very difficult to get rid of it. And that's when it recurs and recurs, and every time that there's an opportunity, the trips come out, and the skin, the lesion kind of like restarts again the cycle, and the infection process starts. So it's probably the major issue, that once it is established in a farm, it's difficult to get rid of it, and the tricky part is how to keep it contained, and how to keep those trips from insisting and from creating these really bad chronic lesions.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting, a good segue to one of my questions, which is, what is the prevalence of DD on a lot of dairies? So once you have it, how many cows in the herd are going to have it, and is that going to differ? Can you have it at a subclinical level without showing a lot of cows with clinical symptoms? Like, what does that prevalence look like?
It varies. The prevalences vary a lot, depending, if we start first, like maybe even with the type of system. From pasture-based systems, we rarely see it, but places like New Zealand, for example, have reported it. Chile have reported it. We've seen it in several pasture-based systems, but that's very low prevalence, less than a 5%, from a 2-3%. So pasture-based systems, very low. In confined systems is where we see it the most, and that would be close to 20%, 25%, and that would be numbers of active lesions. So those erosion, ulcerative-like M2s, that can be up to 20% lesions, and that's way too high. But actually, with the studies that we've done in Canada, when I run several trials, we would even see it on 75% of the cows.
Oof.
Any given stage, because what you usually record, and what a lot of the hoof trimmers record from records, or what we get to see, is the ulcerative kind of lesion, and that's the 20%, but we would get to see it up to a 75% in any given stage. So even like very, very tiny, just very small lesions, sometimes it would be that high. But we can think about it about 10 to 20% for active lesions. And then if we have it in the young stock, if the infection is starting since then, it even tends to be higher in the milking herd. So that's kind of one red flag as well. If we're getting to see way too much DD a lot of time in the milking herd, a lot of times you just go back and start analyzing the young stock prevalence in there, and it turns out to be that we get to see it even from heifers that are 6 months old up to whatever age, but it can start that early. And usually when the young stock is infected, the lactating herd is going to have even higher prevalences. So very, very highly prevalent, and the incidence as well, pretty high. Very problematic. And that's what makes it probably the most costly lesion, just because of its prevalence.
Does it self-cure ever?
There are several types of cows, and it depends on the susceptibility of the cow. So it seems to be that Many individual factors play a role in this disease happening or not. The susceptibility of the host is one, parity is another, breed is another, and there's also a genetic component. And some cows tend to show just like one infection and no more. Just the type 1 cows may end up having just one infection and they don't recur. There are other type of cows that may have twice the infection and then they don't recur, but then there is the other type of cows, the type 3 cows that have recurrent over and over again, and those are the long-term consequences of DD that is very difficult to get rid of. So yeah, we do see cows that heal and that the same susceptibility, and we don't know exactly what it is, if it's just one thing or the combination of susceptibility of host, genetic components as well may play a slight role in there, or also the type of bacteria that is infecting and the different families as well.
Yeah. So what are talk me through, like, you said once it gets into a herd, how does it get into a herd? And then once it's there, what are some of the risk factors that we're looking at for cows that are getting infected?
Yeah, so the way that it gets into a herd, it usually, the treponemes, this bacteria that is associated with the lesions, lives in many tissues. We find it in the rectum, in the gingiva, in the rumen. So it is part of some of the tissues like that we have. It's a normal component, but the way that we think that gets or it's transmitted from one cow to the other, it's most likely through the footprints. So with DD lesions that are basically spreading the bacteria in the environment, and when cows step on it, then that's the way that it's usually that we think that it's spread and that it's that cows get infected. Sometimes there could be other factors. There could be also they've been isolating treponemes also from hoof trimming devices, but usually we know that it is very short-lived in the environment. It only lasts a few hours alive in the environment, but it's most likely through those footprints that cows get infected over and over and over again. And we need again those micro lacerations. So it's not that the infection kind of sporadically occurs in the cow. We need a way of entry. And that's when also the complicated dynamics with other bacteria play a role, because we do need that entryway for the lesion and for the disease to establish. But it also depends on many other factors at the farm level. So the second part of your question, which was on risk factors at the herd level, have to do with how do we control the lesion. And when we looked at just herd level risk factors, we look into anything that has to do with hygiene and biosecurity. So those are probably the main factors that we think of. Hygiene is just huge because we know that cows that are that are dirty or like poor hygiene in the environment reflected on poor like cleanliness, those cows are more likely to have DD. And then there are biosecurity practices as well, internal and external biosecurity practices. So don't think just introducing animals from other farms, but also just within our farm, and just the manure scraping practices that we have from, let's say, if the direction of the manure scraping, the number of times that we scrape as well. Stocking density has a role to play in how dirty the environment is as well. Those play a big role in establishing the bacteria and the disease. But we mainly look at biosecurity, hygiene practices, and that life cycle of the disease getting transmitted from young stock to first lactation, second lactation, and establishing in that way. So
what about risk factors at the cow level? So are there ways, if you have cows with stronger immunity, for example, cows that, maybe transition better, a better position to fight off infection, can we influence risk at the cow level as well?
In what way?
So, I love the transition period, right? And cows that transition poorly, they're going to have a harder time fighting off a lot of infections. Mastitis can be really common in the transition period. Can we lump digital dermatitis in under that as well?
When I was referring to kind of like how the bacteria starts invading and kind of going down the skin layers, when it's very well established, it insists. And when it insists, it creates that that kind of chronicity as well. And when there are stressful events, then that bacteria gets back in track and comes out again, and the outbreaks kind of start. Seasonality has to do with it as well. But yeah, there is not a lot of research about transition in this example that you're putting transition cow or anything like that specific, but we do think that the stressful events play a role in that. Once the bacteria has established and is there, a stressful event just makes it proliferate again and come out again. But it also has to do a lot with other different management factors related to seasonality and hygiene, animal movement. So animal movement is a big one. If we introduce a lot of animals or big groups, then or several cows are starting to have M2 lesions at the same time, then that will start an outbreak and will make everybody else more susceptible. As far as the individual part that you were asking about, there is a bit of a genetic predisposition too. So at the individual cow level that you were mentioning, there is new research coming out. Maybe in the past 10 years, we know that there is a heritability component, and there are some the genetic indexes are looking into how to breed DD out of cows, but we know that there is some heritability and some genetic component that it's just part of the big puzzle of everything that contributes to establishing DD and playing those dynamics, but it is a component as well at the individual level. Then we also know at the individual level that heifers or first priority cows are more susceptible than older cows. Older cows are more susceptible to other types of lesions like sole ulcers and white lines. But younger cows are more susceptible to DD.
Interesting. A lot of things, it seems like it's the other way around, right? It's the older cows that are problem children. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And breed has a little bit to, well, not a little, but most of the research is on Holsteins. But we know that Holsteins are more susceptible than Jerseys or other breeds. So that also plays a bit of a role in there as well.
Okay.
Typical fresh cow incidence of clinical hypocalcemia is 3 to 6%, while subclinical hypocalcemia affects 50% or more mature cows. Based on cutting-edge research, Exelite offers a new approach that is build effective and the ZDUs. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
I think that's a perfect point to start asking about treatment and management strategies. So prevention, it sounds like, is a great management strategy if you can keep it from getting into your herd. But what other options do we have for treatment and management?
Well, with prevention too, we may talk about food bathing a little bit later on, but that's another side of prevention. With the prevention part, I just really want us to start focusing a lot on the hygiene and the internal and external biosecurity, because those two components are going to play a big role long term in the preventive part of things. As far as the treatment side of things, what we need to first make very clear is that not all DD lesions are treated or should be treated in a way. There would be different severities and also different response to those treatments, and we kind of need to select strategically and consciously which lesions deserve treatment, and of those that we should treat, with what products we should be treating. That's another important thing as well. So As far as treatment goes, the first thing is to try to get the treatment as early as possible. So and that applies the same for absolutely any other disease, but the earliest that you get it and the earliest that you treat it, the more likely you're gonna be to have a successful treatment and healing, but also the less likely that it will recur again. So that's the trickiest part, and that's what it's very, very important, not just to heal, but to prevent that it comes back and creates that chronicity. And that we just go back to the stages that we roughly talk about. And we want to treat those M2 lesions that are still kind of like first time M2 lesions, 2 centimeter kind of erosion, ulcer-like lesions. Those ones, we have different options for treatment. We usually, as it is a bacterial infection, then antibiotic is a go-to treatment. We need the issue with the antibiotic use, it's that several years ago, it was used at a large quantity in many cows, dumping all the antibiotic that we could in those lesions. And that, of course, came out in milk residues. So that created this whole issue of milk residues with tetracycline, and regulations came after that. So now we know that we need a veterinary client-patient relationship to have the prescriptions for tetracycline, and we know that tetracycline comes out in milk, and we know at what extent it does. That doesn't mean that other products do not come out in milk, because basically anything that you put in the hoof is going to come out in milk. We only have very few data about tetracycline and about salicylic acid, I think, on just the extent that the residues are, but with that, we want to focus on doing a strategic treatment of low doses, 2 grams of tetracycline, but talk to the veterinarian and set up those protocols, and only to those lesions that really have the more that are more likely to heal. Then there are other lesions. Actually, the AEBP released not long ago a whole fact sheet on different treatment options, but we have salicylic acid pastes. It is important that we don't put stuff that is very corrosive and very aggressive, and it's going to create a bigger reaction in the skin, a bigger inflammation, and will make things worse. And that's some of the cases that we see with very, very corrosive products out there. So make sure that there is some sort of compound or vehicle that makes these treatments less aggressive and less corrosive. But those are, so basically, those are some of the things that we need to look at when we think about treatments. Some active lesions and which type of active lesions we select for treatment, for topical treatment. And it is worth it to really spend time training and talking to our hoof trimmers and talking to our people in the farm on which are the worthwhile lesions to treat topically, and at what dosage, and how to be careful with it. And that's the role of the vets, really, to place that. But it is really important to have a good protocol with that. And then the other ones, we really can use other types of products. We can use chelated coppers, and some people uses just vinegar solutions as well, or some paste, something to bring down. But also the most important part is to just decrease the pain in the cow. So some NSAIDs also, if the lesion is bad and the cow is limping out of pain, then we can consider also NSAIDs, and again have that conversation with the veterinarian, because really NSAIDs really help decreasing that and the inflammation component of it. And for the other side of things, we focus on the prevention side of things.
I really enjoy talking about that prevention side of things, because I think one of the common things I heard with high path this past year, high path avian influenza, was dairy farmers need to do a better job of biosecurity, because we traditionally have not been, like, these are good, the interventions we were recommending for high path, many of them were things that probably we should be doing already, right?
Yeah.
biosecurity is something that the dairy industry has not paid attention to as much as some other industries, but there's so many other benefits, right? Not just and this is a great example, just the internal and external biosecurity that you're talking about, and prevention of all sorts of different diseases.
We've been very spoiled by not having any terrible outbreaks of
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
foot and mouth disease, or you name it. But yeah, now we have to be more than careful. But yeah, and when we talk about biosecurity, it's not again just the introduction of animals. It's just from manure management, animal movements, anything that we bring in and out.
Yeah. We are starting to run short on time, but I did have a couple questions I wanted to ask you, so I'm going to sneak them in. One of them, you mentioned foot bathing and foot baths. Do you want to just talk about foot baths for a sec?
Yeah. So foot bathing, well, specifically, it's a huge part of all the preventive strategies that we put in place. I think that we've just focused so much on foot bathing, and all the products that we use and how we have to do it, that we've really lack very important things like hygiene and biosecurity. And that's why I wanted to emphasize that. So I think we need to switch a little bit our mentalities with the purpose of foot bathing, but also the importance of hygiene and biosecurity. And that's why I was mentioning that even before foot bathing. But foot bathing, and I'm sure that a lot of people has heard about it. Foot bathing, we want maybe if we just go back to the role of the topical treatment, the role of the topical treatment is to bring that M2 into an M4, and that it heals, and it's just to heal that lesion. And the role of the foot bath is to prevent that once those lesions are healed, they go back to an active stage. So it is, first of all, very, very important to know that the foot bath is for a preventive strategy and not for a treatment strategy. And what we want to do is just prevent, kind of like keep those healed lesions in that state, and slowly, just by managing that, bring them down into healed lesions so that they don't become active again. And as far as the foot bath, probably you've heard of many products and many things, many concentrations, many combinations of different strategies and ways of doing it. But the most important part about foot bathing is having the right foot bath and having the right management to it, regardless of what product we're going to be using. Just having long foot baths that are 10 to 12 feet long and that are about 10-inch deep, that just cover the area where digital dermatitis occurs, but also that allow that the cows step twice, 3 times in the foot bath. That's one of the most important things, just the design of that foot bath. That I mentioned that we can play a little bit with is the width of the foot bath. Just if we modify the width, we can really save a lot of volume and saving on product as well. But really, narrow foot baths are ideal just because it has the effect that the cows go in a flow kind of slowly, opposed to just running through the foot bath. And if we add to that side walls that prevent that product from splashing out, that is another good component of it. So the design of the foot bath plays a huge role, but the management, the fact that we have to do it consistently, the pH of the foot bath as well, how often we change the products, the frequency of use, that's also part of the protocol itself. And as far as management itself, we think about consistent use. Whatever you're doing it consistently 2-3 times a week. People always ask, how many times should I be foot bathing and how often should I be replacing it and all of that. Really, that's a case by case protocol that we set up on farm. We used to think many years ago, and people would recommend run the foot bath every single day. It's like a pre-dip, just hit them hard, hit them strong. And we're really moving away from that notion of heavy chemical use, not just from the environment perspective and the potential effect that it has on humans as well, if we use formaldehyde, for example, or copper sulfate for the environment, but also on just on how it changes the skin microbiota and the lesions and just the inflammation and the irritation that it may cause. So we kind of have to be careful with that, and we know that the foot bath is it should be used consistently, but it's not something that it should be used every single day. And this is not talking about an outbreak. We manage things a little bit different when they're an outbreak, but just to mention the consistent part of use and then the frequency, we know that it should be changed every 200, 300 cow passes, or when the pH levels drop. Usually we should be having foot baths that are from 3 to 5 in the pH scale. So when they are way above that, they're not very efficient. And when they're below that pH of 3.5, then they're very acidic and they're gonna burn feet. And then, more than the type of products that we use is really how we manage those products and how we manage that foot bath and what type of design we have. A lot of times we go to farms and they have just like a sloped foot bath. It has a great design, but it's just a slope, so really effective is only like foot long kind of thing, and that's a little bit of a waste of product and time. So there are ways of making it a little bit more efficient and actually reducing its use to make it more strategic.
That was perfect. No, that was a perfect answer. Yes. Keep thinking, oh, I need to like send this to my dairy challenge students.
Yeah, well, there is, I think, so much we're gonna be able to use foot baths for at least the typical products that we're using. In Europe, a lot of these products are already banned and we can't use them. So we're really, and with all of the carbon neutral plans for 2050 and whatnot, I think we need to be a step ahead and prepare for thinking hygiene, biosecurity, and how do we improve that, opposed to foot bath, foot bathing. It's part of it, but the message is it's not all of it.
It's also costly too, right?
Like, and it's
all
costly.
Of those,
the water use, the product, where does that product goes? So there are many ways that I think that we can do better. And when we think about hygiene, that's difficult too. How do we keep cows clean in a barn, and what does hygiene really means in a barn? But we can play with facility design, just thinking about cow comfort. That plays a huge role on the hygiene side of things. How wide our alleys are, how stocked we keep our herds, what type of bedding we use, how bedded our stalls are. Can we use maybe some other practices like hosing cows' hooves during milking, or before or after, just to get all of that cake manure out? All of those strategies on hygiene can actually play a good role as well. And the manure removal, designing for just keeping cows out of the alleys as well while they're eating in the feed alley. That can be also some other facility design strategies that can help us maintain good hygiene.
It's time for our famous three. Priority IAC, the only company bringing the fields of microbiology and nutrition together, and the first ingredient in animal diets. Priority provides a more cost-effective and easier approach to nutrition. We recognize that not all bacteria are created equal. The specific strain truly matters. Priority IAC selects unique strains to provide the best performance in animals, and that's why we call these strains smart bacteria. Founded by Richard Brunig, helping to improve animal health one herd at a time.
All right, well, it's about time. I hate to cut this short, but it's about time for us to move on to our three questions. But before we do, I know, right? Time flies. Before we do, is there anything that we forgot to talk about that you want to make sure, or anything that you want to reiterate for the audience?
No, maybe we didn't not much, but maybe some of the new stuff that is coming out is on really trying to understand that community and that those different families in DD lesions and what role they play in establishing or triggering and establishing that disease, because that relates to vaccines and what preventive strategies we have on those in that area. But it's just lots of new technologies now that it's being used, and the regular kind of development of vaccines hasn't been very successful. So now I think different groups around the world are using different very high-tech metagenomic strategies to see what the bacterial families look like and how different pathogens play different roles in helping this bacteria or not helping it, or kind of like opening and letting it establish. So a lot of research is on how all of these different bacteria interacts with each other and how they allow the success of the establishment of disease or not, and looking at that in order to think about vaccines or not, and using artificial intelligence to get to better study the relationships of those relationships, and also use of artificial intelligence to detect digital dermatitis in real time. That's also some of the stuff that is coming up as well. And yeah, probably that's
Very cool. Well, it sounds like we could do a whole new podcast about
I know.
the upcoming technologies. Yes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's quite a bit. It's quite a bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, as you know, we ask all of our guests 3 questions. The first one, and I know you're prepared for this one, our first question is, what is your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
She gave me a heads up
Yeah.
before, so I was like, oh, I actually have that book. Well, I have many. I have several, but very easy, nice kind of graphics. I like this book, the
Oh, I
Simple
have
book.
that one.
Yeah, actually, this is in Spanish, but
Yes.
but this I really like all the graphics of it and the explanation of the lesions.
We should probably say for the podcast listeners the title of the book, because they won't be
Oh,
looking at the
yeah.
video. Yep.
So cojeras en el ganado bovino, this would be lameness in, what is in English?
I don't have it on my shelf with me, but
Wait, I also have it in English, wait. Cattle lameness. It's just the cattle lameness book from Simpro, and the manual of foot care. That's a really good. This is just lameness related. All right.
Yes.
So I'm not gonna bore you with other good books around there, but yeah, Dr. Jan Shear's manual of care is a really good one. Yeah, I also like the Merck manual, the online Merck manual, and the Dairyland Initiative. I think that's a really, the Dairyland Initiative has excellent resources, and also the podcast too, that not to compete with each other,
Right.
but also the podcast this one, and that one is also really good. Those are my go-to.
So the next question then is, what is your favorite non-dairy related book or resource?
I have 2 little kids, so I've been reading a lot of really books for toddlers for
Yeah.
the longest time. Unfortunately, it's hard to even remember. I think the latest one that I read that I loved was All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh my gosh, I love that
right,
one.
it's really good.
Yes.
And then I'm a fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Realismo Mágico. How do you say that in English? And just magic realism and 100
Okay.
Years of Solitude. That's one of my favorite books as well. Yeah, Latin American literature's amazing. Yeah.
All right. Last question then is, what do you think sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are not successful?
I think the ability to adapt to change and to errors and to just different things coming in your way. I think that really sets people apart, besides leadership and all of these soft skills as well, but just the ability to adapt to anything long-term and shorter term is what makes people set apart.
Great note to end on. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot.
Maybe I'll see you in Iowa.
I hope so. Or in La Crosse, we'll probably see each other.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. All right. Thank you very much then.
All right. Thank you so much.